क्या नेहरू महान प्रधानमंत्री रहे हैं या नहीं? डिबेट और नगाड़ों के साथ में एलएफ का 15वां सीजन का हुआ समापन। आखिरी दिन कुर्सी से गिरे अभी 5 दिनों से होटल क्लार्क्स आमेर में पहली बार आयोजित हुआ जेएलएफ, जहां पर पहले दिन लोगों की आमद कम नजर आई, मगर धीरे धीरे लोगों की आमद बढ़ने लगी। शनिवार और रविवार को काफ़ी लोगों की तादाद बढ़ी। जेएलएफ का लुत्फ उठाने के लिए लोग धीरे धीरे पहुंचने लगे। हालांकि लोगों की जुबां पर डिग्गी पहले से छाया रहा। कमियों और खूबियों के साथ क्लार्क्स आमेर का पहला साहित्य उत्सव में लोग मनोरंजन व डिबेट को सुनने के लिए पहुंचे। हालांकि क्लार्क्स आमेर के होटल स्टाफ और मैनेजमेंट ने अपनी जानिब पूरी कोशिश की कि आए हुए मेहमानों को खुश किया जाए और किसी हद तक कामयाब भी रहे। जेएलएफ के पहले दिन लोगों को पार्किंग की दिक्कत की सामना करना पड़ रहा था। पार्किंग की व्यवस्था पहली बार सही व्यवस्थित तरीके से नहीं की गई। गर्मी होने की वजह से फ्रंट लॉन और मुगल टेंट में लोग भी परेशान नजर आए, मगर सारे बेहतरीन स्पीकर्स का सीजन फ्रंट लॉन और मुगल टेंट में रहे। लोगों की मजबूरी रही कि उसे अटेंड करें। नीना गुप्ता फिल्म अदाकारा का सेशन मैं सच कहूँ तो पर अपनी किताब पर लॉन्चिंग से प्रेस से वार्ता करने के लिए पहुंची। नीना गुप्ता 1 घंटे देर से पहुंची। उसके बावजूद भी नीना गुप्ता ने मीडिया से माफ़ी मांगने की बजाय अपनी सफाई पेश की कि वो देर से नहीं आई है। प्रेस वार्ता में उनसे सवाल पर जेएलएफ को टारगेट किया और कहा कि जेएलएफ में सीट पर बैठने के लिए लल्लू लोग आते हैं और सीधा किताब लिखने को लेकर मीडिया वालों को उनके सामने ही कहा, सालो मैं वो नहीं, मैं ये हूँ। अफसोस, इतनी बड़ी अदाकारा जेएलएफ में बहुत कुछ गलत बयानी कर गई और मैनेजमेंट खामोश रहा। मनीष मल्होत्रा फैशन डिज़ाइनर ने भी अपने सेशन में फैशन डिज़ाइन के बारे में बहुत कुछ कहा। शशि थरूर तो फीमेल्स के आंखों के तारे हैं। हर कोई उनसे सेशन अटेंड करने के लिए बेताब रहते हैं और सेल्फी लेने का तो वो अपना फर्ज समझती हैं। प्रेस वार्ता में मीडिया मैनेज करने वाली एक युवती ने बड़े ही बदतमीज़ और गुस्से में बात करती हुई नजर आई, जबकि शशि थरूर की प्रेस वार्ता में बैठने का कोई सिस्टम मैनेजमेंट की तरफ से नहीं बना हुआ था। ऐसा लग रहा था कि किसी मीडिया व्यक्ति से वो चिड़ी हुई है। हालांकि होटल में मधुमक्खियों का छत्ता भी लगा हुआ था। एक दिन काफ़ी संख्या में मधुमक्खियां उड़ने लगी। थोड़ी परेशानी का सामना ज़रूर हुआ। आखिरी दिन में आखिरी सेशन में नेहरू जी को लेकर सेशन रहा, जिसमें शानदार डिबेट रही। आखिर में साबित हुआ कि नेहरू जी महान प्रधानमंत्री रहे। 2023 में 19 जनवरी से 23 जनवरी को जेएलएफ का आयोजन होगा। हालांकि जगह का अनाउंसमेंट नहीं किया गया।
So yes, and Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel also made it very clear in a letter written to Nehru that there are people who play up our differences for their petty ends. I am quoting Sardar verbatim. There are people who play our differences for their petty ends, but we, both you and I, have learned to recognize, respect, and accommodate each other's viewpoints. That is how a consensual government is run, not by the wit of a dictator. As a moral human being, I am very much in the business of judgment. I judge people. I judge actions. Number one. Number two, I admit on behalf of Nehru that he might have been a visionary, but he was not Nostradamus. So he could not probably see that in 1991 Soviet Union will disintegrate. He could not probably see that in 1971 Pakistan will disintegrate. He was not Nostradamus. He did not know that at a certain point of time this is going to happen or that is going to happen. Finally, not me, I want to quote someone who said, and I quote in Hindi, महर्षि वाल्मीकि ने भगवान राम को विरुद्धों का सामंजस्य कहा है। वे कठोर भी थे और कोमल भी, समझौता भी कर सकते थे और अड़ भी सकते थे। महर्षि वाल्मीकि ने राम को विरुद्धों का सामंजस्य कहा है। पंडित जी कुछ ऐसे ही व्यक्ति थे। ये पंडित जवाहरलाल नेहरू के बारे में कहा जा रहा है। पंडित जी कुछ ऐसे ही व्यक्ति थे और कहने वाले का नाम है श्री अटल बिहारी वाजपेयी। धन्यवाद।
this very exciting debate. But I would like to answer one question again, which Shazia has raised. I don't see that because I happen to be a Muslim, I must discuss the idea of secularism, except that secularism was not really part of the Constitution of India at the time that the Constitution was passed. It came in much later. Nor was the Hindu Code Bill part of the Constitution of India. It also came by a legislation which was much later and actually debated in Parliament. The fact is that we have to look upon this altogether as Indians and look upon the benefits that the era of Pandit Nehru had for all Indians, which is what I had started with. The question not is whether one community was better or worse than before, because that is not the issue. If we are wanting to say he remains the greatest Prime Minister, we have to then establish, which I have tried to do and others have also tried to do, and even the opposition has virtually conceded that Panditji left India a far better place than he found it. And I think there can be no dispute regarding this. I think the idea is that, and there have been certain names mentioned, when you say the greatest Prime Minister and you say that you dispute that, then you have to say that, okay, if he was not the greatest, who is the greatest? Certain names were mentioned. I was fortunate enough to work, in fact, very closely with both the names mentioned, which is Dr. Manmohan Singh and Mr. Narasimha Rao. Both, yes, were great Prime Ministers. But their successes and their failures have been widely discussed, and I don't need to enter into debate here because I myself was maybe part of those failures. But the point that needs to be noted is that none of them faced the kind of challenge which Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru faced, and therefore none of their achievements can be described despite the shortcomings of great.
Nehru didn't have either. He was known to be short-tempered, and in fact, during partition, there is a story that he took a gun, whether it was legal or not, who knows, and threatened to personally intervene against mob violence. So that showed a personal disregard, but also a man who could be short-tempered, but also could show great love. Now, everyone had set up India to fail in 1947. Nobody expected us to survive, let alone strive. And he had a vision of India that could go further than the existing problems. There were great men and some women in the cabinet, unfortunately too few women, who were great ministers, but none had that vision to surpass the existing circumstances in the difficult situation. Now secularism has been brought up. He had a principled stand, I have a principled stand, many people have a principled stand. But secularism, I would say, was the only choice India had if we were not to be in perpetual civil war. And every country who hasn't taken that will always be in perpetual civil war. And to underscore that, I'll take his argument that Tripadaman was talking about this morning with Allama Iqbal, where he took up the cause of Ahmadiyas or Qadians as they're called, which today in Pakistan, due to General Zia, every Pakistani has to sign a statement saying they're heretics. And he argued for Ahmadiyya's pre-independence from jail, not for political votes, because he wanted to. And I will end with this quote very quickly, to paraphrase Shakespeare. The errors that men do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones. So let us say in 50 years, I will wager there will be nobody else will be debating as the greatest Prime Minister.
So I think we all view our worlds from our own prism, and there's so many identities to who we are. So I speak from my point of view. There is a lot of viciousness handed out to me in very glib ways, and people see secularism from their point of view. When we talk about Nehru and secularism, the point that I made, and I stand by it, and also those who are Nehruvians, I would like to say it is we have to see secularism from what it has achieved for us, and I would like to say that whether is the ideals by which he stood by, as we see in the past. And I would like all of you to go and study about the Hindu Code Bill, of which I'm very proud of. But in terms of how Ambedkar and members of the Constituent Assembly, including whether it's Ambedkar or Sri Rajagopalachari or even some Pooranand, or even Maulana Azad, how they argued with him on the subject. You must read about what they felt, and also the fact that Nehru's follies were not mean, and they costed us a lot, and that by nature. He was not magnanimous when it came to India, whether it's Kashmir or siding with Sheikh Abdullah as opposed to Hari Singh, and whether it's a contribution of Sardar Patel. There are so many, you can call them oversights, you could call them blunders, but I think when secularism goes, we have to rethink and reassess.
I said that Nehru's imprint on India runs so deep that it continues to constitute central ground in Indian politics. I maintain that, I don't disagree with that, but that does not ipso facto mean that Nehru was India's greatest prime minister. Bajajji mentioned the challenges that Nehru faced. There were huge tailwinds that Nehru generated as well. We must acknowledge them. That include the lack of a political challenger, the huge political capital that he brought to the table, so on and so forth. But even more so, I want to talk about those parts of India's Nehruvian legacy that others don't want to talk about. Those who oppose India's overbearing centralized state oppose a key legacy of Nehruvianism. Those who oppose India's all-powerful executive oppose a key legacy of Nehruvianism. Those who oppose the law of sedition oppose a key legacy of Nehruvianism. Those who disagree with the Armed Forces Special Powers Act disagree with a key legacy of Nehruvianism. Those who disagree with draconian public safety laws disagree with a key legacy of Nehruvianism. I'd like all of you to keep these things in mind. If you do disagree with all of these things, you are disagreeing fundamentally with India's Nehruvian legacy. You cannot be a votary of Nehruvianism and then say, well, these are terrible things. This is part and parcel of Nehruvianism. Whether we like it or not, it comes as a complete package. It doesn't come for us to pick and choose from. Please keep this in mind.
Thanking both sides and to the audience for raising their questions. This debate around Nehru is one of the most important aspects.